It was the week before our annual family barbecue, the one we'd been holding every summer for as long as I could remember. It wasn't anything fancy, a few fold-out tables, a grill in the backyard, and enough food to feed an army. Our family is big, loud, and full of opinions, but that's exactly how we liked it. No matter what else was happening in the world, the barbecue was our chance to reconnect, argue over politics, and just enjoy each other's company. It had been a tradition since I was a kid, and I wasn't about to let anything mess with it. The call came from my sister. I could tell by the way she said my name that this wasn't going to be good. "You know Jake, right?" she asked, using that tone she reserved for when she was about to drop a bombshell. I didn't know Jake very well. He was her new boyfriend, and we'd met him briefly at a family dinner a few months ago. He seemed okay, quiet, a little awkward, and a bit out of place, but nothing too alarming. He wasn't my type, but I could tell she was really into him, and that was enough for me to keep my thoughts to myself. "Yeah, I remember him," I replied cautiously. "What about him?" "Well, he's vegan," she said, dragging the word out like she was revealing a deep, dark secret. I blinked. Vegan, of course. She was dating a vegan. Why not? It was 2024, and everyone was either vegan, gluten-free, or allergic to something. "Okay," I trailed off. "What does that have to do with the barbecue?" "Well," she continued, "I was thinking maybe we could adapt the menu this year. You know, make it more vegan-friendly." The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. My barbecue, my sacred, smoke-filled backyard tradition that had been passed down from generations. This was no time to change things up. Not for anyone, not for her vegan boyfriend. I didn't say anything for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. "But, it's a barbecue," I finally said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "You can't just turn it into some plant-based festival. It's about the meat. It's always been about the meat." She sighed, and I could hear her frustration building. "I get it. Okay, but it's important to Jake. He's a part of my life now, and I want him to feel comfortable. Can't you just, throw in a veggie burger or something?" A veggie burger. My stomach turned at the thought. The barbecue wasn't just food. It was a celebration, a gathering of our family where we reveled in the joys of grilled steaks, sausages, ribs, real food. I wasn't about to start throwing tofu on the grill just because some guy had decided to give up meat for whatever reason. "I don't know," I said finally, feeling the tension in my chest. It's a tradition. You know." "Yeah, I know," she replied, sounding defeated. "I just thought you'd understand. But I'll tell Jake, I guess." The conversation ended there, but I could feel the weight of it hanging over me. I'd always prided myself on being accommodating when it came to family. But this was different. This was an attack on something that I'd worked hard to create. And I wasn't about to let some vegan change everything. The next few days were filled with passive-aggressive comments from my sister. She mentioned how Jake was really looking forward to the barbecue and how it would mean so much to her if I could make a few changes to the menu. She sent me links to great vegan barbecue ideas on Pinterest. As if I hadn't spent years perfecting my grilling techniques. I could feel my patience wearing thin. The day before the barbecue, I was at the store, picking up the usual supplies: ribs, sausages, burgers. As I stood there staring at the meat section, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. The whole point of the barbecue was the food. The joy in watching the grill master, me, cook up a feast that everyone would rave about for days. I couldn't just throw in a few kale chips and call it a day. My phone buzzed, and I saw my sister's name on the screen. "I know you're probably stressed about tomorrow, but Jake really can't eat all the meat. It would just be so much better if we had some stuff he can enjoy too," she said in her message. "Please, I really want to make this work." The guilt crept in. Was I being unreasonable? Couldn't I just compromise for once? But deep down, I knew it wasn't about Jake's dietary restrictions, it was about preserving something that was mine. This barbecue wasn't just about feeding people, it was about our family traditions, our way of life. As I stared at the assortment of meat in my cart, a sense of anger started to rise. Why should I have to change? Why couldn't my sister see how much this meant to me? I wasn't just rejecting Jake's veganism, I was rejecting the idea that I needed to change myself for someone else. And the more I thought about it, the more determined I became to stand my ground. The day of the barbecue arrived. The sun was out. The air was thick with the smell of fresh cut grass and burning charcoal. As usual, my dad was in charge of the beer, and my mom was busy running around making sure everything was perfect. I was out on the grill, flipping burgers and sizzling sausages, getting lost in the rhythm of it all. I could feel the tension building as I saw my sister's car pull into the driveway. She got out, Jake trailing behind her, looking like a deer in headlights. He was holding a Tupperware container filled with something that looked like quinoa salad. And I could already tell that this wasn't going to go well. "Hey, Jake," I called out, forcing a smile. "Glad you could make it." He gave a nervous nod, offering me the container. "I brought a salad. It's vegan. I thought it might be something everyone could share." I nodded and put it on the table. But inside, I felt a wave of irritation. "Great," I muttered. "Thanks." As the barbecue progressed, it became clear that this wasn't just about the food. There was a palpable sense of discomfort between Jake and the rest of the family. Everyone was trying to be polite, but the elephant in the room was hard to ignore. No one knew how to handle the fact that the barbecue was now half vegan. It wasn't even that the food was bad, there were some good veggie dishes, but the whole vibe of the event was off. The sizzle of the meat on the grill was muted by the awkwardness of having to accommodate one person. I tried to focus on the positives. The sun was out. Everyone was enjoying themselves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It was like my barbecue, my tradition, had been tainted by this outside influence. And the worst part was that I was starting to feel resentful toward my sister. After a few hours, Jake quietly excused himself to sit under the tree, looking uncomfortable. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't exactly blending in either. I couldn't help but feel irritated. This was my barbecue, and now everything was different. Later that evening, as the party started to wind down, my sister came over to where I was standing by the grill. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the yard. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded, bracing myself. I could tell by the tone in her voice that this wasn't going to be easy. "I know you didn't want to change the barbecue. And I get it," she began, "but I need you to understand that Jake means a lot to me. And I just wanted him to feel included. It wasn't about making you change everything. It's just about finding a balance. I wanted to show him that we care about him, too." I didn't say anything for a long time. Part of me wanted to snap, to tell her that it wasn't fair to ask me to change the whole event for one person. But another part of me, one that I didn't want to acknowledge, realized she was right. The barbecue wasn't just about the food. It was about family, and sometimes, family meant compromise. "I get it," I finally said, my voice soft. "I'm sorry, I was being stubborn." She smiled, and I could see the relief on her face. "It's okay, I know you were just trying to protect something that's important to you." I get that too. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't about the vegan food or the meat on the grill, it was about making room for the people you care about. Even if they're different from you. Maybe Jake wasn't my favorite person, but he was important to my sister, and that meant something. The barbecue wrapped up quietly after that. We didn't have some grand epiphany or emotional reconciliation, but we had something better: understanding. The next year, I made sure to include a few vegan options on the menu. But I never let go of the heart of the barbecue. It was still about family, laughter, and a ridiculous amount of meat on the grill. And as I flipped the burgers, I couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes, the best part of tradition isn't sticking to the old ways, it's being open enough to make room for the new ones. I had learned to compromise without losing myself. And for the first time in years, I realized that family isn't just about the food, it's about making space for everyone. Even the vegans. The summer after the barbecue was different. My sister and Jake were still together. And while the awkwardness from that first barbecue was fading, there were moments when I could see the cracks. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about the fact that Jake was still, in some ways, an outsider. He was trying to fit in, trying to make this family thing work. But I could tell he wasn't quite comfortable. I wasn't sure if it was the whole vegan thing or something else. But I had started to notice the way he hesitated to join in on conversations. The way he lingered on the sidelines, picking at his quinoa salad while the rest of us dug into the steaks and ribs. And yet, I was determined to make it work. For my sister, sure, but also for myself. The change was small, but it was real. I wanted my sister to know that I had moved past that stubborn, territorial feeling I had held onto for so long. If this barbecue, this tradition, was going to evolve, then maybe that was okay. I didn't have to hold onto it the way I used to. It was about adapting, evolving, and still keeping the heart of what made it ours. This year, I decided I'd take a different approach. I wasn't going to be the one grilling for hours alone, trying to make sure everyone was happy. I was going to open up, let people help, Let them be a part of it. After all, it wasn't just about the meat. It was about the community we created together. The conversations around the grill. The camaraderie. So, I called my sister a few weeks before the event and told her I was thinking of doing things a little differently. I'm going to need your help, I said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear my own voice crack with the weight of the shift I was suggesting. I'm thinking of making more than just the usual stuff this year. You know, more vegan-friendly options. I want to make sure Jake feels at home. But we're going to keep the classic stuff, too. She didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear the surprise in her silence. You mean it? She asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. You're really going to make more vegan stuff? Yeah, I'll still do the ribs and the burgers, I said, a chuckle escaping my lips as I imagined the look on her face. But I think we can make it work. She didn't hesitate. I'll get the vegan stuff. And I'll make sure it's something everyone can enjoy. Thanks for doing this. Really, it means a lot to me. To Jake, too. There was an odd warmth in my chest as I hung up the phone. I wasn't sure if it was pride or relief. But something had shifted inside me. It wasn't about giving in. It was about finding balance. And, oddly enough, it felt good to know I was making an effort. The week leading up to the barbecue, I found myself thinking about that first summer. About the tensions I had felt. The resentment I had harbored. It was strange how much had changed in a year. I had never thought I would get to a place where I could embrace the idea of adding vegan food to the barbecue lineup. But it wasn't just the food. It was the people who mattered. The ones who were there to share the day. To laugh. To argue about politics. And to enjoy the warmth of the summer evening. When the day of the barbecue finally arrived, the atmosphere was entirely different. The backyard, usually a cacophony of sizzling meat, was now alive with laughter and chatter from every corner. I had my grill set up, of course, with the usual array of meats sizzling away in the heat. But there were other tables. 2 tables with colorful salads, veggie skewers, and even a vegan, pulled pork made of jackfruit. Which, I'll admit, wasn't half bad. Jake arrived early, which was unusual. He seemed more at ease this time. I saw him helping my sister with the drinks, bringing over the extra chairs, and even greeting people with a smile. It was a stark contrast from the previous year when he had looked uncomfortable and out of place. He wasn't just standing by the food table anymore. He was in it, and somehow, that made all the difference. I found myself noticing the subtle shifts in everyone's behavior. My cousin Emily, who had been quietly skeptical about vegan food in the past, was trying the grilled mushrooms and nodding approvingly. Even Uncle Bob, who had a history of making slightly inappropriate jokes about anything remotely healthy, was munching on a grilled veggie skewer with a thoughtful look on his face. But it wasn't just the food. It was the conversation. Jake was no longer standing off to the side. He was a part of the group now. He didn't have to apologize for his veganism. And we didn't have to pretend it didn't matter. We all just existed in the same space, enjoying what we had to offer, whether it was a rare steak or a plate of roasted vegetables. Around the grill, my family gathered as usual, cracking open beers and laughing. My dad, ever the barbecue purist, was teasing me about the veggie skewers. But it wasn't malicious. It wasn't, "This is weird," or "Why are we doing this?" It was more like, "You're really going to feed us this stuff? Huh?" And the good-natured banter made me realize that we hadn't lost the essence of what the barbecue was about. As I flipped the burgers, I saw Jake chatting with my cousin Brian, of all people, about the best way to cook tempeh on the grill. It wasn't that they had become best friends, but there was a camaraderie there, a shared interest in trying new things and making it work. Jake was fitting in, slowly, but surely. He was finding his place. And I realized something important. It wasn't the food that made the barbecue special. It was the connections, the shared history, the memories we created year after year. This barbecue had always been about people who had different views, different tastes, different ways of life, and yet, somehow, we always made it work. I stood back, watching everyone interact. My family was loud and full of contradictions, as usual, but this year felt different. It felt like we had all learned to grow, to adapt, without losing who we were. And maybe that was the real tradition, the ability to evolve, to change, but to still hold on to the things that mattered. Later in the evening, after the food had been devoured and the sun had dipped below the horizon, I found myself sitting next to Jake. He was eating the last of his tempeh burger, and there was a quiet contentment in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "Thanks for making the effort," he said, His voice soft. It wasn't a huge gesture, but it was genuine. I nodded, trying to find the right words. It wasn't just for you. It was for all of us. And for the first time, I felt at peace. Because this barbecue wasn't just about keeping old traditions, it was about making new ones. 2. The next few years passed in a blur of BBQs. Each one a little different than the last. We still had the classic ribs, the burgers, the smoky aromas wafting through the backyard. But now there were also vegan options, gluten-free sides, and even a few healthier alternatives. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Because we had learned that our family was big enough to accommodate everyone, no matter their dietary preferences. Jake became a fixture in our family. And while I still couldn't say we were best friends, I had come to appreciate his presence in a way I hadn't before. He wasn't just my sister's boyfriend anymore. He was someone I genuinely respected. Someone who had become part of the family. The tradition of the barbecue had evolved. And so had I. We all had. The truth was, family wasn't about getting everything exactly the way you wanted it. It was about being open to change. About accepting each other, flaws and all. And in the end, the barbecue wasn't about the food. It was about the people. It was about us. And that, I realized, was the most important tradition of all. The next few summers passed without much fanfare. Each barbecue settling into its own rhythm. My sister and Jake had become a staple at family gatherings. We'd gotten past the awkwardness of that first year, and there was a quiet peace that I had never expected to find in my tradition of grilling ribs and throwing back beers. But, like most things in life, this was a season, one that was slowly shifting in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The weather was starting to turn cooler one September when I got the call from my sister. She was excited, practically vibrating with news that wasn't unexpected, but still a big deal. Jake had proposed. The wedding was set for the spring, and she wanted me to be the best man. At first, I thought she was joking. Wait, you mean the maid of honor? Right, not this time, she said, laughing. You're the best man. It's happening, so get used to the idea. It was a surreal moment. I'd been reluctant to give Jake my full approval at first. Not because I didn't like him. I liked him well enough. But because he represented a change. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But now, as I stood in the middle of my backyard later that evening, grilling burgers for the usual crew, I realized how far we'd all come. It wasn't just Jake who had changed. I had too. The BBQs that had once been an unquestionable institution, an annual ritual where I had control over everything, had slowly started to feel like a celebration of growth. Not just tradition. It was easy to stick with the way things were. Easy to believe that the same old habits and customs should dictate how we spent our summers. But somewhere in the mix of changing menus and accommodating new family members, I had come to understand that the essence of the barbecue wasn't rooted in the food, the grill, or even the number of meat dishes I served. It was in the people. And now, my sister was getting married. Jake, the guy who had once been an outsider, was about to be a part of this family forever. I didn't know how it would all unfold, but I was ready to see what happened. Spring arrived too quickly. The wedding was beautiful, a small, intimate ceremony at a nearby park, with everyone gathered under the trees, watching as my sister and Jake exchanged vows. I had somehow managed to shake off the nerves that came with standing at the front of the ceremony as the best man. I didn't have much to say, but I knew enough to be proud of my sister and happy for them both. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception hall where the usual relatives were gathered. Laughing, eating, and reminiscing. It wasn't quite the barbecue, but it felt like an extension of it. Somehow a continuation of the traditions that had been built over decades. The dinner had a mix of dishes. Some familiar, some new, steak, chicken, and grilled vegetables. Yes, but also a beautiful vegan lasagna that had somehow become the star of the night. It wasn't a compromise anymore. It was just part of the bigger picture. The night was full of dancing and speeches. And as I looked around the room, I realized how far we had all come. There was no discomfort anymore. No uneasy tension over the vegan options or Jake's presence. I saw the same laughter. The same bickering over who was going to take home the leftovers. The same feeling of community that had always existed in our family. But there was more now. There was a new layer of understanding. We had grown together, adapted together, and embraced the differences that once felt impossible to bridge. The BBQs continued. Of course. The following summer, Jake was just as much a part of the routine as anyone else. The grill sizzled with the usual assortment of meats. But there were vegan sausages and veggie skewers, too. It wasn't because we had to, or because we were catering to one person, but because that's what had become normal. And normal, I realized, wasn't such a bad thing. Jake and my sister had their own place now, and while I still wasn't great at the whole emotional sharing thing, I found myself making an effort. It wasn't about the food or the traditions anymore. It was about the people who gathered around the grill. It was about finding the moments where we all connected, not just through shared meals, but through laughter, memories, and, yes, sometimes disagreements. Years passed. My sister and Jake's family grew, as did ours. The BBQs continued, each year adding a new layer of history to the story. The kids were old enough to help with grilling, or at least to steal bites of food when no one was looking. The music changed, the faces changed, but there was something undeniably comforting in the continuity of it all. One year, I noticed Jake standing by the grill, flipping veggie burgers with a level of precision that only someone who had been watching me closely for years could achieve. I hadn't thought much about it, but there he was, holding a spatula in his hand, just like I did every summer. He wasn't just my sister's husband anymore, he was a part of this family. And I realized that it wasn't just the vegan dishes that had changed over the years, it was him. He had become a part of the tradition, just like everyone else. There was a certain satisfaction in watching it all unfold, in seeing how far we'd come. And it wasn't just about food or the rituals we followed. It was about finding ways to meet in the middle, to create something that worked for everyone, even when that felt impossible. My barbecue wasn't the same as it had been when I first started hosting it. But that was okay, the heart of it was still there. As the years went on, I couldn't help but think back to the summer when I had been so determined to keep everything exactly the same, to reject any form of change. If I had refused then, if I had stayed in my stubborn little bubble, I would have missed out on so much. The way my sister's happiness had grown, the way our family had expanded, and the way I had learned that family wasn't about rigid rules or staying in the same place forever. Family was about growth, acceptance, and learning to adapt without losing who we were at our core. The last barbecue I hosted, years down the road, was filled with more than just the usual crowd. There were little kids running around, a few of my cousins' partners, and even friends of Jake's who had become part of the fold. As the grill sizzled away and laughter rang through the air, I found myself looking around at the people I loved, the people I had fought for, the people who had shaped me into who I was today. And as I stood there, watching Jake toss a few more veggie burgers on the grill, I knew one thing for certain: it had never been about the food. It had always been about the people. And no matter how many changes came our way, that would always be the heart of the tradition.